to it and shoot for the sky.
WCW may have died in 2001, but its legacy lives to this very day. It offered wrestlers another place to perform and perfect their crafts. Wrestlers always went back and forth from WWE to WCW, and from WCW to WWE. Some of the biggest stars from WCW did, however, make their way to WWE and became a big star there too. So in this video, we look back at the 10 biggest WCW stars to ever sign with WWE. Rules for this list are they had to become a big star in WCW and come over to WWE after. They can't be former WWE stars. So let's start the list. Number 1, Chris Jericho. After leaving ECW in 1996, Jericho made his way to WCW. WCW was notorious for stealing talent from ECW. Wrestlers knew WCW would pay better, and it was easy for WCW to approach ECW wrestlers with more money and offers. Jericho was one of those wrestlers. In WCW, Jericho would hold cruiserweight and TV title gold. But as for Jericho, just like the case with many other wrestlers, he was only allowed to go so far. He wasn't ever going to be able to break through as a megastar there, and WCW only saw so much value in him. He stayed in WCW from 1996 to 1999. He'd go to WWE in 1999 and had a legendary career that lasted until 2017. In WWE, he'd hold 25 titles. He'd also get to become a rock star in the band Fozzy and enjoy classic matches and moments with wrestlers like The Rock, Stone Cold Steve Austin, Dean Ambrose, and Kevin Owens, and tons more. He'd go to New Japan in 2017 and AEW in 2019. But WCW was where he got to build a character and show off his charisma and talent. But WWE is where he got to prove himself and become a megastar. Number 2, The Big Show. The Big Show is without a doubt one of WCW's biggest stars, physically and athletically. He entered the professional wrestling world in 1994 and quickly made his way to WCW in 1995. In his very first match in WCW, he defeated Hulk Hogan to win the WCW World Heavyweight Championship. And throughout his WCW career, he'd become a member of the NWO and hold multiple reigns as World Champion and Tag Team Champion. He eventually would leave WCW due to not making as much money as the main eventers. He in his own right was a former World Champion in WCW and wrestled some of the biggest names they had to offer. And not making anything near what they were making was insulting enough for Show to let his contract expire in 1999. Just days after leaving WCW, he'd arrive in WWE and in major storylines, with the likes of Mr. McMahon and Stone Cold Steve Austin. In WWE, he'd become a bigger star than he was before, and was a big player in the Attitude Era. In WWE, he'd also join factions like the Corporation and the Authority, and wrestle on brands like Raw, SmackDown, and ECW. He'd also have a number tag team runs with partners like Kane, Undertaker, The Miz, and Chris Jericho, alongside others. In WWE, he'd hold 19 different championship reigns, with 5 of those being world titles. He'd last in WWE from 1999 to 2021, and would leave WWE due to creative frustrations and lack of ideas, alongside not being able to agree to financial terms on a new contract. He'd leave WWE to join AEW in 2021 and go by his real name, Paul White, since. As of this writing in February 2025, he is still signed with AEW. And although his wrestling career has drastically winded down, he still makes appearances on shows and commentary for AEW. Show was once a giant in WCW, but wasn't shown the respect and pay of his co-workers. And when he came to WWE, he was already known as a big star. WWE was his time and place to show the world who he was and what he was capable of. And it's safe to say he did just that. Number 3, Ric Flair. Ric Flair is actually maybe one of a handful that can say he's done this twice. Flair started making a name for himself in the early 70s in AWA. He also spent time in Japan in New Japan Pro Wrestling as part of a working agreement between AWA and New Japan. He then in 1974 continued to make his name bigger in Jim Crockett Promotions, which later would become WCW. His career in Crockett Promotions, New Japan, and later WCW lasted from 1974 to 1991. At this point in AWA, New Japan, and Crockett and WCW brands, Flair had already been world champion and wrestled legendary matches and feuds. So, when he debuted in WWE in 1991, he was already a huge star and well-known around the world. He'd debut in 1991 in WWE with the original Big Gold belt used in WCW. During his WWE run, he won the 1992 Royal Rumble, won the WWE Championship, wrestled at WrestleMania, and wrestled now legends like Roddy Piper, Randy Savage, and many others. He'd leave WWE in 1993 after moved down to the mid-card scene from the main event scene. He'd return to WCW in 1993 and would stay until its death in 2001. He'd once again in WCW become world champion multiple times. He'd feud with Hulk Hogan, Sting, the NWO, and others. He'd return to WWE in 2001, and this time was a 16-time world champion and a Hall of Fame worthy wrestler. He'd wrestle in WWE from 2001 to 2009 and would have another legendary chapter of his already iconic career. He'd wrestle matches like ladder matches, I Quit matches, cage matches, and even Money in the Bank matches. He'd wrestle WrestleMania matches against the likes of Undertaker, Shawn Michaels, The Rock, and others. This time around, he'd also hold Intercontinental and Tag Team title gold, respectively. And also would team with Triple H, Randy Orton, and Batista in the dominant faction Evolution. In 2008, he would wrestle Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania, in what would be his last WWE match and what was supposed to be his retirement. He'd join the WWE Hall of Fame in 2008 night before WrestleMania 24. He'd make some appearances up to 2009 before leave WWE. But in 2009, after leaving WWE, he'd wrestle for Ring of Honor in a feud with Hulk Hogan. Flair would join TNA in 2010 and stay until 2012. He wrestled in TNA and joined factions like Immortal and Fortune. After leaving TNA on 2011, he went back to WWE in mentor and major roles. This career stint would last from 2012 to 2021. At this point, he making Legends appearances and acting as a manager and side roles. By August 2021, he was granted his release from the company. After this run with WWE, he'd make appearances in companies such as NWA and joining their Hall of Fame and the Lucha Libre AAA organization. He wrestled his last match at an event in Nashville, Tennessee, titled Ric Flair's Last Match, which saw him team with Andrade El Idolo to defeat Jeff Jarrett and Jay Lethal. And for less than a year between October 2023 and July 2024, he made appearances for AEW. So, as long as this entry may be, that's just how long Flair's career has really been. But you can see in this article, he came to WWE in the early 90s, a big-time star in wrestling, and when he returned to WWE in 2001, once again, returned a bigger star and name than he did the first time around. Number 4. Sting. Sting is an icon and considered the best to many fans worldwide. He began his career in 1985, wrestling in Continental Wrestling Association. By 1986, he moved on to Universal Wrestling Federation. But by 1987, he moved to Jim Crockett Promotions, later known as WCW. He'd stay from 1987 all the way up to WCW's closing in 2001. It was during this time he would transition from the blonde Beach Sting character to the Crow version Sting. In WCW, he'd hold over 15 titles, including 6 world championships, win multiple tournaments, and even join stables like NWO Wolfpack. But in 2001, WWE had bought out WCW, and in 2002, he would enter contract negotiations with WWE, but ultimately decided against it. For about a year, he'd join the World Wrestling All-Stars organization before moving to TNA Wrestling, where he'd wrestle from 2003 to 2014. Just like his WCW past, in TNA, Sting would collect multiple championships, including 4 world titles, win tournaments and awards, and even join their Hall of Fame in 2012. By 2014, Sting would make his way to WWE, and already a Hall of Fame and legendary wrestler. He'd stay in WWE from 2014 to 2020. He wrestled 3 matches in WWE. One was a tag team match on Raw, with John Cena against Seth Rollins and Big Show. One was against Triple H at WrestleMania 31, and the last one was at Night of Champions 2015, when he faced Seth Rollins for the WWE World Championship in a losing effort. During his time in WWE, he won a couple Slammy Awards and joined the WWE Hall of Fame in 2016. After leaving WWE, he'd join AEW and wrestle from 2020 to 2024 into his second and final retirement. He's still signed to AEW with a Legends deal to this day. But Sting came to WWE in 2014, and almost everyone in the world thought he'd never make it to WWE. And by the time he did, he was a legend from his WCW past and a little bit of TNA in his career log too. Sting could have gone to WWE in 2001 and done just fine. But when he made the move to WWE in 2014, there was no denying that this was one of the biggest signings for WWE ever, and him being the WCW legend he was, only cemented his spot for this list entry. Number 5, Booker T. Booker T started out wrestling in 1990 in Texas and got his big break in the Global Wrestling Federation in 1992. But by 1993, he was WCW bound and stayed all the way to WCW's death in 2001. During his WCW career, he held 21 titles, in which 10 of those were tag team titles and 5 of those were world titles. When WCW was bought out by WWE in 2001, he was brought into WWE and was WCW World Champion and United States Champion too. He would side with WCW in the WWE Invasion period. He'd stay in WWE until 2007, where he'd hold 11 championships, including a world title, and win the King of the Ring tournament in 2006. After leaving WWE in 2007, he'd join TNA Wrestling, where he'd stay until 2010, where he did hold a Legends title and a tag team title too. He'd wrestle a small stint in Puerto Rico and Mexico between 2009 and 2010 before returning to WWE in 2011. This time around in WWE, he took on many roles, such as a color commentator, general manager, and occasional wrestler. During this run, he'd also join the WWE Hall of Fame in 2013. Still to this day, he performs as a commentator on the NXT brand and pre-show panelist. He also runs his own wrestling organization, Reality of Wrestling. In 2019, he became a 2-time WWE Hall of Famer, alongside his brother Stevie Ray. And although he has had a legendary career, in 2001 he was one of the few big names who chose to go to WWE, instead of letting his WCW contract expire and accept free money for sitting at home. He came to WWE a big homegrown WCW name and was WCW World Champion too. WCW had a lot of big-name stars, but a lot of them were already big-made stars from WWE or elsewhere. Booker T, alongside a handful of wrestlers, made his name bigger in WCW. And when he came to WWE, the fans and others already knew of him. He was a big star in WCW, and when he came to WWE, he was a bigger star, and only grew more as one of the all-time greats. Number 6, Scott Steiner. Scott Steiner began his wrestling career in 1986 in the Indianapolis-based World Wrestling Association and would even become WWA World Champion. He'd later move on to the Memphis, Tennessee-based Continental Wrestling Association and would hold tag team title gold there. But in 1989, he got his big break when he officially made his debut in WCW and would stay there from 1989 to 1992. During this period, he would start teaming with his brother, Rick Steiner, and for the Steiner Brothers tag team. They'd hold tag team title gold. He'd personally have matches and feuds with Ric Flair and other popular names at that time. By 1992, Scott, along with Rick, would transition to WWE, where they stayed until 1994. Now it's important to mention that he was not the main event star he was later in his career. So this is not the time period where he was a big WCW and crossed over to WWE, but he was well respected and gained enough attention to be signed by WWE. He, with Rick, would debut at the 1993 Royal Rumble even, and was even successful in their WrestleMania debut in tag team action against the Head Shrinkers at WrestleMania 9. They'd feud with teams like the Head Shrinkers, Money Inc., the Smoking Guns, and others in WWE at that time. They'd also hold the WWE Tag Team titles on a couple occasions. After the 1994 Royal Rumble event, the Steiner brothers would leave WWE. They'd wrestle in New Japan Pro Wrestling and WWE between 1991 and 1995, where they would capture the New Japan Tag Team titles. In 1995, they would wrestle in ECW for a couple of months before returning to WCW in 1996 and stayed until 2001 until WCW's death. They would continue as a tag team and would win WCW Tag Team title gold. But in 1998, Scott Steiner would start abandoning his brother Rick and beginning his singles career and push. This is when he'd find his own look and character. By 1999, he'd feud with big names like Goldberg, DDP, Booker T, and others. He'd win multiple WCW titles like the TV title, the United States title, and by 2000 would become WCW World Champion. He would compete on the final WCW Nitro against Booker T and lose the world title to him. He, like many names, would choose to stay home and receive money from his contract. He'd wrestle for World Wrestling All-Stars from 2001 to 2002 before joining WWE in November 2002 at Survivor Series. At this time, Scott Steiner was a big former WCW star and world champion, and was a big signing for WWE. But unlike a lot of big-time WCW names who came to WWE, Steiner wouldn't amount to much. He did start out on a main event level, feuding with the likes of Triple H and world title matches and stories. But after this short-lived feud and pushed, he'd be moved from main event status to mid-card status. He would team with Test and wrestle in lower card matches and less popular stories. His last WWE match would be in the 2004 Royal Rumble match. After his WWE run, he'd wrestle for independent wrestling companies, and the most success he'd reach would be TNA. In 2022, he'd join the WWE Hall of Fame with Rick Steiner as they Steiner Brothers. Tag team was inducted together. Scott's run with WWE in 1992 and 1994 was a much bigger success than his run between 2002 and 2004. He did earn his main event status and name in WCW, and he was one of WCW's biggest names to transition over to WWE. But he didn't live up to the hype, and WWE eventually didn't see him as world champion or main event worthy after a few months of coming to WWE in 2002. So this could be a reminder that just because you come to WWE from another place with a huge name and push doesn't mean it's gonna make you that in WWE. Steiner learned that he had to give more than 100% in WWE to be on the same level as some of his former WCW colleagues who moved up higher in WWE. Unfortunately, WWE didn't see him in the main event light, and Steiner didn't really try all that hard to earn that spot either. Number 7, the Radicals. The group consisted of 4 men: Eddie Guerrero, Chris Benoit, Dean Malenko, and Perry Saturn. They all wrestled for ECW and eventually made their way to WCW by mid-90s. All members would hold titles in WCW and was very promising for the company. Unfortunately, due to WCW's poor booking and management, they would only reach a certain level in the company and would never be given the chance to become main event caliber stars they knew they could be. But by early 2000, all four men joined WWE. This 4-in-1 talent grab was a great way to introduce the stars as a group and build them into superstars. They'd all have success, as Dean Malenko would capture the WWE Light Heavyweight title on a few occasions. Perry Saturn would hold WWE Hardcore and European titles. Eddie Guerrero would hold the WWE European and Intercontinental Championships, and Chris Benoit would hold Intercontinental Gold as well. As the years gone by, Dean Malenko would eventually become a WWE trainer after retiring, and Perry Saturn would leave WWE and live a difficult life of substance abuse and other personal issues. Chris Benoit and Eddie Guerrero would become the most successful of the four. Eddie would stay in WWE until his tragic death in 2005. After the Radical stable disbanded, he'd have success in WWE, like becoming a United States champion, a tag team champion, and even a WWE champion plus other titles he already previously held. After his death in 2005, he'd join the WWE Hall of Fame in 2006. Still to this day, he is celebrated and missed, and wrestlers such as Mercedes Moné and others have credited Eddie as the reason they got into wrestling to begin with. Chris Benoit would also have major success after the group's end, as he'd hold WWE World Tag Team titles and SmackDown Tag Team titles, along with becoming WWE World Heavyweight Champion in 2004. He'd hold other titles too, like the WWE United States Championship as well, and competed in matches like Elimination Chambers, Money in the Bank matches, and even WrestleMania main events. But Benoit would tarnish his name and career when the unfortunate and sad events of 2007 happened, when he took the life of his wife Nancy and his son Daniel, before taking his own life in a double murder-suicide. Benoit, to this day, since his horrific acts in 2007, is not mentioned in any capacity by WWE and has been scrubbed from their business going forward. These four guys were the future, and in WCW, they created enough of a name and buzz for themselves respectively to catch the eyes of WWE, and they were big names for WWE to grab. Fans knew of the men and was excited about their debut in WWE in 2000. For some in the group, they gained little success, and for others, they reached main event status. Regardless of what the future would later hold for the men, in the early 2000s, they were big names to the fans, and WWE gave them the chance and platform to become bigger stars. Although only half of the group were able to reach main event status in WWE, they all are remembered for their success in the Attitude Era. And there's no denying that their move to WWE influenced others, that a move to WWE may be in their best interest and the best move for their careers. Number 8, Rey Mysterio. Rey Mysterio is probably the most experienced wrestler on this list. He debuted in Mexico at the age of 14 and trained under the Lucha Libre style. He wrestled in Mexico in independent circuits before making his way to ECW in 1995 and stayed there for a little over half a year before going to WCW. He wrestled for WCW from 1996 to its death in 2001. In WCW, he was able to show the world what Lucha Libre wrestling was all about and gave American fans an insightful view on the Lucha Libre style and what he and other smaller wrestlers were capable of. In WCW, he popularized the cruiserweight division and style and became a multi-time cruiserweight and tag team champion. He was without a doubt a huge star in WCW, and fans loved him. When WCW went out of business in 2001, he would transition back to the Mexico and independent wrestling circuits. In 2002, he would debut in WWE, and that's where he'd become the main event star he was destined to be. He immediately started feuding either big stars like Kurt Angle and many others. And during his time in WWE from 2002 to 2015, he'd win career-defining matches like Royal Rumble matches and WrestleMania main events. He'd hold just about every title WWE had to offer, ranging from tag team titles and cruiserweight titles to intercontinental titles and all the way up to WWE World titles too. After 13 years of being a top WWE star, he would leave and wrestle in the Lucha Libre, AAA promotion, and independent wrestling circuits. Between 2015 and 2018, he'd wrestle for Lucha Underground, New Japan Pro Wrestling, and AAA again. But in 2018, he returned to WWE and has been there ever since. In his second and current WWE run, he's been in classic matches and feuds, held titles like the United States Championship and Tag Team Championships, and even leads the LWO stable. He also became a WWE Hall of Famer in 2023, and still to this day, performs at a high level and is one of WWE's top stars. He currently wrestles on the Monday Night Raw brand. Ray was one of those stars in WCW that no matter how hard he worked or how good he was, his size and poor booking would never allow him to rise above and break out as a top world title contender or star. He had just a big enough name and star power to gain attention. And when WCW died, we came a-knocking. And it was in WWE where he became a legend and hero, on top of becoming a huge star and world champion caliber athlete. Number 9, Eric Bischoff. Between 1991 and 1999, Eric Bischoff was the head of power in WCW. He was responsible for stealing talent from ECW and WWE, and even beat WWE in Monday Night Raw 83 weeks in a row and became the biggest threat to WWA ever. He was a commentator and member of the NWO. In 1999, he was relieved of his management duties and replaced by Vince Russo. He returned as an on-screen character in 2000. In 2001, he attempted to buy WCW, but WCW would sell to Vince McMahon of the WWE, and the Monday Night Wars were over. In 2002, he debuted in WWE as the Raw General Manager until 2007. He is responsible for creating the Elimination Chamber match and feuded with big names such as John Cena and others during his time in WWE. After leaving WWE in 2007, he'd make sporadic appearances for the company before officially joining TNA in 2010, all the way up to 2014. From 2016 to this day, he still makes appearances and hosts his own podcast, 83 Weeks with Eric Bischoff. From 2020 to 2021, he made a small handful of appearances in AEW. In 2021, he joined the WWE Hall of Fame. He may not be a wrestler, but he was a huge signing for WWE back in 2002. No one ever saw him ever coming to WWE, and after coming to WWE, it was possible anybody could come to WWE. The possibilities were endless after his signing. And the fact he was responsible for trying to kill WWE during the Monday Night Wars made his signing more shocking and unbelievable, and more of a big deal. Number 10, Goldberg. In the early 90s, Goldberg played football in the NFL and being signed to teams like the Atlanta Falcons and Carolina Panthers. But in 1997, Goldberg made his debut in professional wrestling. He debuted in WCW and stayed until WCW's death in 2001. During his time in WCW, he was able to capture the WCW United States Championship, the WCW Tag Team Championships, and WCW World Heavyweight Championship. He feuded with legends like Hulk Hogan, Bret Hart, and many others. After some time in Japan, he showed up in WWE for about a year. He'd wrestle with the likes of Triple H, The Rock, Brock Lesnar, and other names. He'd even hold the World Heavyweight Championship at one point. He'd leave WWE after WrestleMania 20. But years later, in 2016, he would return to WWE. He'd come back and feud with Brock Lesnar again, along with other names like Bobby Lashley, Bray Wyatt, and Undertaker, along other names. In his second run, he'd become a two-time WWE Universal Champion and a WWE Hall of Famer in 2018. He was one WCW's homegrown talents and had a big name made for himself by the time he came to WWE, and it's fair to say his times in WWE have elevated his legendary status. He was one of WCW's biggest stars, and WWE was able to make some money on him, and that's all that matters to them. He is set to wrestle his last match in WWE in 2025 sometime. And that was our list. Can you think of any other big names from WCW that came to WWE and was a big name there too? Leave it in the comment section below. Don't forget to follow Ring Post Daily Podcast on YouTube and Facebook. We'll see you next time, guys.